Hey folks, Ace here, back with another tier list video for you guys. In this video, I will be ranking all of the companions of Pillars of Eternity 1 on a tier list. This is continuing a series of videos I've done covering the Pillars of Eternity series. I actually started with Deadfire and now I'm on Pillars 1. All of this is in anticipation for the forthcoming release of the next title in this IP, Avowed. Now, a companion tier list is something people often request from me, but I do not believe I've ever done since I started a YouTube channel. I think I did have a companion tier list in a written format before I was ever a YouTuber. It's been that long since I've done one of these. Now, the reason I don't do them is because I find them, especially in the games I cover, mostly to be useless. Because I always do class tier lists. I always rank classes, and in pretty much all of these games, what a companion offers you is like 95% determined by their class, right? So if you just watch my class tier list, you can have a pretty good idea of what my companion tier list is going to be like. And honestly, Pillars of Eternity is not that different. Take Durance, for example. Durance is a priest. If you go to my class tier list, you will see I have ranked priest in the S tier. Correspondingly, Durance is an S tier companion, strictly speaking, if we're just talking about what he brings to a party. Because he's still a priest. Even though his stats really aren't that great, which we're going to talk about, he's still a priest. And you need a priest in your party, you might as well have Durance there. It's that simple. So it's not interesting. It's not really interesting for me to do a tactical companion tier list that is separate from my class tier list. That said, I've decided to do this one a little differently, and that is because of the inclusion in this game of mercenaries. I have a little mercenary tag here. In Pillars of Eternity, you can hire mercenaries, which are custom-made units that you make just like you'd make your main character. And the only real downside of hiring a mercenary is there are two costs. First, there is a gold cost. It will cost an initial sum of gold, which is determined by the level of mercenary that you hire. And then there is an experience cost, where you can only hire a level of mercenary up to one level below your main character. So if your main character is level 10, you can hire up to a level 9 mercenary. A level 9 mercenary will be more expensive than a level 8. A level 8 more expensive than a level 7. You get the idea. Now, both of these costs are mitigated if you just hire your mercenaries very early in the game. If you hire them as soon as possible, like right when you get to the Black Hound, you should be around level 3. You can hire a level 2 mercenary, and the cost for that is quite low, and also the experience cost is quite low, because the difference between a level 3 character and a level 2 character when it comes to the flat value of their experience is not very much by the time you get to levels 11, 12, 13. So that they are the same level as the rest of your party, and they're leveling up at basically the same time as the rest of your party. All of that's to say mercenaries are S tier. You can almost always make a mercenary that is better than the corresponding companion of their class. That said, if you hire a mercenary in the early game, you're likely not to have the money to hire a full party, right? Also, you want to spend your money in the early game doing other things like buying items. So you might not hire a mercenary of a class of some companions that you know are pretty much as good as a mercenary as you could otherwise make. And all of that is to say, this is a very long intro, but that is to say how I'm going to be ranking these companions in this tier list is like that. I'll be asking the question, how likely am I to replace this companion with a mercenary from strictly a tactics perspective? So to return to Durance, even though Durance is an S tier unit, he's much, much worse than a typical mercenary that I would hire. So on my list of mercenaries, a priest mercenary is right up there, in which case Durance would rank low on this tier list. So even though he's an S tier unit, I'm ranking him as a C tier companion. So then if we go through the tiers, an S tier companion in this ranking is a companion that is pretty much just as good as a mercenary that you can make of the same class, maybe even a little bit better in some ways because of unique features that they have that mercenaries don't get. An A tier companion in this game is one that is pretty much just as good as a mercenary. Maybe they don't have any unique stuff that makes them sort of better or more interesting, but they're just as good as a mercenary that you'd hire, so you're unlikely to replace them. B tier classes are the ones that I do sometimes replace with mercenaries, and then C tier are the ones I am very likely to replace with mercenaries. All right, so that is going to be this tier list. And then at the very end, I'm just going to talk a bit briefly about how I rank the narrative design and writing of these companions, just because I find that really fun. That's not something you can really objectively rank, but none of these tier list rankings are very objective anyways. This is just a format for expressing my opinions, so I might as well express my opinions on the narrative design as well as the tactical value of the units. Okay, let's dive into the tier list now. We are going to be starting with Aloth. I've got a PowerPoint here that lists the relevant stats that the units have. Aloth is the first companion you get. He is a Wood Elf Wizard. For attributes, he has a Might of 12, Constitution 10, Dexterity 15, Perception 12, Intellect 16, and Resolve 13. He has no unique features that you couldn't get on a Mercenary Wizard. Wood Elf is a pretty decent race for a Wizard. Wood Elves get a racial feature called Distant Advantage, I think, something like that, which gives them an accuracy increase. I believe it's 5 or 6 whenever they are attacking units that are a certain distance away from them. It is not a very restrictive distance, so you're very likely to get it. As long as you're casting range spells or making ranged attacks, you're very likely to get that bonus to accuracy. And that's actually quite good. It's just a little bit extra bit of accuracy that most races wouldn't otherwise get. To be honest, I rank Wood Elf very highly in Pillars of Eternity. I think the racial feature that they get is awesome. Although maybe wizards aren't the best class for them. It depends on how you build your wizards. There are lots of ways to play wizards in this game. It's very fun, but definitely the way I prefer and I think tends to be best are wizard builds that focus on their summoned weapons. And there are some ranged summoned weapons that are good, but some of the best summoned weapons that they have, especially in the early and mid game, are melee weapons, in which case the Wood Elf racial feature isn't doing anything for you really. But I mean, you're always going to be casting some ranged spells, so yeah, Wood Elf is nice. For attributes, the primary attributes that you want from a wizard are always intellect. Intellect's very important for wizards. They get a lot of value from that. I think might is the second most important stat for wizards. Especially in the early game, there are some spells that you get that just scale really well with might. I'm thinking Council Hot's Draining Staff. I think that's what it's called. It's that summon quarterstaff weapon. Extremely good. High base damage and a healing effect, which means it scales very well with might. I'm thinking Infused with Vital Essence. The other Council Hot's Draining spell, the level 2 one, which does an AoE drain, scales very well with might. These together make your early game wizard, if you're willing to spend the spell slots, an absolute juggernaut. And then even late game, wizards have a lot of spells and summon weapons that just have high base damage, and they're just going to scale better with might. So I definitely prefer intellect, might, and then after that is probably perception and dexterity. Doesn't really matter. Dexterity is going to be a little bit better if you want to focus on weapon attacks. Perception is going to be a little bit better if you want to focus on crowd control. Aloth has good intellect, good dexterity, and pretty meh in all the rest of his stats. He has a 13 resolve, which is really kind of a waste for wizards. Even the 10 constitution is a waste for wizards, to be honest. Like, you can just dump resolve and constitution on wizards, and it's not a problem for them because they have very easy ways with their spells to offset what these stats give them. But yeah, his stats aren't horrible. That said, I'm going to put Aloth in B tier. I definitely do replace Aloth with mercenaries from time to time just because wizards can be so good if you build them right. Aloth isn't terrible, but he's also not good in my opinion. It's the low might for me that really holds him back. I want high might on my wizards. So yeah, Aloth is going into B tier. Next up is Eder. Let's take a look at Eder. All right, Eder is a human fighter. His attributes are Might 16, Constitution 16, Dexterity 11, Perception 12, Intellect 10, Resolve 13. Honestly, these are pretty good stats for a fighter. The most important stat for fighters, in my opinion, is Might. After that, it's Constitution and Dexterity. Perception isn't bad. Resolve isn't bad. Intellect, you don't need much of it, but you also don't want to dump it, which is what you've got for Eder. Honestly, this is pretty decent. Like, you can squeeze out a little bit more value if you want to min-max, but it's not that important. That said, the human part of Eder is not very good in this game, I find. I can't remember exactly why. It's been a while since I've read up on this, but I've noticed in Pillars of Eternity Deadfire that the human racial feature is really good and useful. And even though it's the same in Pillars of Eternity 1, it's not as good and useful. In fact, I find it mostly to be useless. Actually, I don't think it's exactly the same. I think there might just be a delay on it. So it's supposed to trigger when you drop below half health, but in Pillars of Eternity 1, it triggers a few seconds after you drop below half health, and that delays enough to make it very inconsistent and unreliable for me on most units, and it's already just not very good on fighters, because fighters in this game are pretty much always at full health. You want to build a lot of healing on them. They just scale really well with healing. They got a lot of natural healing themselves. Eder already has a high might, so his healing is boosted. And so you're just unlikely to drop below half health on fighters. I don't know what else to say. It's just a useless racial feature. So that is kind of a bummer for him. So I think Eder probably goes into B tier. He's a decent fighter. Honestly, I don't have him on my party very often, because fighters are just kind of weak units. When I do keep him in my party, it's just because I either want triggered immunity or because I like Eder from a narrative perspective, which we'll talk about later. But purely from a tactical perspective, whether you take him over a companion, I think Eder is going into B tier on this one. Next up is Durance. I've already kind of said Durance is going into C tier, but let's look at why. All right, here we are. Durance. Durance is a human priest. His attributes are Might 14, Constitution 13, Dexterity 9, Perception 9, Intellect 15, Resolve 18. He has no unique features compared to a priest that you could just make as a mercenary. The human part is bad for the same reason. Priests are the other kind of major class in the game that want to build might and just overwhelm people with healing. Durance has a decent might, so his healing is going to be awesome. Your priest just doesn't drop below half health. If your priest does drop below half health, you're in trouble. That's a problem because priests tend to be kind of squishy. So either you're out healing their damage or you're dead. In both cases, human is useless. Stat-wise, his stats are pretty bad. I get why they did the stats like this for narrative reasons. Narratively, this fits Durance perfectly, and Durance's narrative is incredible. I consider him a GOAT contender in RPGs as a whole. But from a tactical perspective, what you mostly want on a priest is definitely high intellect, and Durance's intellect is good. It's not great, but it's good. You want high might. Again, his might's good, not great. And you really want high dexterity, really bad. Especially late game, there are certain fights that can be won or lost depending on how quickly your priest can get out their buffs, and Durance just seems to cast so slow. His dexterity's in the negatives, and it just feels horrible. Especially compared to a mercenary priest I can make where I'm maxing dexterity and they're casting so fast, Durance just really feels sluggish, and that sucks. What he does have a lot of is Resolve and Constitution, and these are two stats which really do nothing for priests. Priests are not a tanky class. They are very squishy, and you can invest a lot in their tanky stats, and they never really become that tanky unless you've cast spells. If you cast the right spells on a priest, they're unkillable. So what you want to do is you want to build around boosting those spells to get durability, not boosting your innate durability. And to boost the spells, you want intellect, might, dexterity, perception, etc. You don't want constitution, you don't want resolve. So that's the big thing that holds Durance back for me. It's just a lot of his stats are honestly kind of wasted in his class, and that's why probably the mercenary I am most likely to hire is priest in my runs. Moving on now to Kana. Let's take a look at Kana. Alright, so here we are. Kana is an Island Amawa chanter. He has a might of 16, constitution of 12, dexterity of 9, perception of 14, intellect of 17, and resolve of 10. Let's start with Island Amawa. Island Amawa get an extra weapon set, which is interesting. It's not a useless feature, definitely, although I often don't use it. That's just because I'm not thinking and I'm kind of too lazy to play totally optimally. This is actually a game that rewards switching weapon sets. You can get a lot of value from switching to a different weapon. There's entire gunner strategies where you just load up your units with guns in every weapon slot and you don't even bother reloading them, you just cycle through. That can work pretty well with Kana. Island Amua are generally decent, but on Kana as a chanter, not really for me. I almost never use it. Chanters are not weapon attackers. They're just not. So switching your weapon set is not that important for them. And yeah, you can do the gunner strategy, but Kana usually wants to be on the front line tanking, as I talked about when I discussed the Chanter class in my class tier list. So Island of Maua is doing nothing for Kana. However, his attributes are pretty good. 17 intellect, amazing. Intellect is the most important stat for Chanters. He's got a 17. You can't ask for more than that, really. I mean, you could on a mercenary, but the difference between a 17 and, say, a 19, not that important. Might, again, I keep saying this, intellect and might, intellect and might. And some of that is that the particular classes we're discussing just really value intellect and might. But also, I do think intellect and might tend to be the most exploitable stats in this game. And Kana has a high stats in both of them. He has a low dexterity, but that just doesn't matter for Chanters. Honestly, you can dump dexterity on them some of the time. So a little bit lower, not a problem. Resolve 10, Constitution 12. I would prefer his Constitution to be a little bit higher, but that's not that important. He has a high might, and you can just focus on healing him to make him tanky. That's enough for him. Perception 14 means you can use some of his offensive spells and get some value out of it. Yeah, I mean, honestly, this isn't much worse than a mercenary as far as stat allocation. So while the Island of Maua is kind of a bummer, his stats are actually quite good. And so honestly, Kana, it's very unlikely for me to replace him. I think A tier is a good spot for him. All right, moving on. Sagani. Let's take a look at Sagani. All right, here we are. Sagani is a Boreal Dwarf Ranger. Boreal Dwarf is a pretty good race for Rangers. They get a big accuracy bonus when targeting certain monster types. Those monster types aren't the most important monster types in the game, but they're also not nothing, right? There are some difficult fights against those types. Boreal Dwarfs are really good against them. I think it's like a 15 bonus to your accuracy, which is awesome. Stat-wise, she has high perception and high might, and then pretty meh across the board and everything else. Rangers do get a lot of value from having a high perception because they have features that trigger effects on crits. I believe it's stunning arrows, something like that, where you can stun targets on crits. It's a very good build to up your perception and just try to stun lock targets. Sagani can absolutely do that. Might is decent on Rangers just because they are ranged weapon attackers, right? So might is one of the better weapon attacking stats. It's basically might and dexterity that you want if you're trying to maximize dealing weapon damage. I think I might kind of prefer it be dexterity for Sagani over might, just because when you're attacking faster, you're more likely to stun lock, and just a few other things as well. But I'll take the might as well. That's fine. I wish the Constitution was lower, because she just doesn't need to be tanky. She's a very squishy class, and she's a range class which wants to be avoiding aggro, so that Constitution is not doing anything. I wish the dexterity was higher. Honestly, I wish the intellect was lower. One of the prime builds that you like to do with Sagani is, I think it's called Preservation, the bow, which has a damage over time, which actually deals more damage the lower your intelligence is. It's not more damage, it's just more damage up front, but whatever, it doesn't super matter. Her stats are fine. And then she has this unique feature of E2 Mach, which it's been a while since I've compared them, but my understanding is that the consensus is E2 Mach, her Snow Fox, is the best animal companion you can get on a ranger. And your animal companion is actually very important for rangers. So with decent race, decent stats, and an even better animal companion than normal, I think Sagani is going to go, our first companion, into S tier. I think I almost never build rangers, either as main characters, I almost never build them as mercenaries, because Sagani is already kind of peak ranger. So if you want one in your party, why go anything else other than Sagani? Next up is Hiravias. All right, here we are. Hiravias is a Hearth Orland druid. Hearth Orland is a great race in this game. Awesome racial feature, which improves your chance to crit when you are attacking the same target as an ally. Awesome. It's really good on offensive weapon attacking classes. And the druid is an offensive weapon attacking class. Attribute-wise, he has really no weaknesses and no severe strengths. His highest stat is a 15 intellect, which is the most important stat for druids. Druids really want a high intellect, and Hiravias is pretty good, right? You can get higher, but not that much higher. Then after that, I usually want weapon attacking stats to maximize on my wild shift, dexterity, and might, and his dexterity and might is pretty good. If you want CC, you want a little bit of perception. He's got a little bit of perception. The con 13 is not great, but it's also not bad considering druids do need to tank some damage when they're in their wild shape form usually, right? Because they have to be attacking in melee. So the constitution isn't even a waste. Overall, just pretty good stats. You could definitely squeeze a little bit more out of his stats if you build a mercenary, but it's not that important. And then he has the unique feature of a Stelgar Spirit Shift, which is pretty much, I think, identical to the Cat Spirit Shift, which is already the best Spirit Shift in the game that you can get on a main character or a mercenary. So yeah, Hiravias is actually a really good druid. Again, just like Sagani, I almost never make druid main characters. I almost never make druid mercenaries because Hiravias is good enough, and yeah, he gets the job done. If you want a druid in your party, why not do Hiravias? Actually, I have made druid main characters, and I'll just have multiple druids in my party because yeah, druids are that good. Druids are an S tier class in my opinion, so Hiravias is probably the best companion just from a purely tactics perspective. Next up is Pallegina. Here we go. Pallegina, one of my favorite paladins in any game. Pallegina is an avian godlike, which is a unique race that you cannot pick on your main character or on a mercenary. So the elusive quarry unique feature is one that godlikes get. I can't remember the exact details, but in editing, I'll display it here on the screen. It's giving you some nice stuff. Not amazing, not terrible either. So it's pretty neat, though, to have a unique racial feature. She is a paladin. Her attributes are Might 12, Constitution 13, Dexterity 11, Perception 14, Intellect 11, and Resolve 15. What do we think about these stats? When I'm building a paladin, the most important attributes for me are intellect really helps. Honestly, I think I would prefer to build my paladins just kind of to go tanky, maybe get some might in there. So things like might, constitution, resolve are good for them. She's got, decent might, decent con, decent resolve. Her resolve's pretty good. Honestly, her stats are extremely vanilla, and it's on a class that it doesn't really matter to me, the stat attribution, I guess, that much. As long as the paladin's tanky enough to live, I guess that's what is important to me, unless you're going for a really specific variant. She's also a unique paladin subclass called Fremes Mesconsuelias, which is really, really, really good. It's basically better than any other paladin that you can make with a custom class. It's giving your team tons of attack speed. It turns your sworn enemy into an ability which just nukes a single target with fire damage, which you can use to finish off enemies very easily, to get a kill, to proc Inspiring Triumph. I talked about that in my class tier list. Pallegina is actually a really unique and interesting paladin. That said, she's in a weird position because paladins vary a lot in build depending on the subclass that you pick from them, and they're unique in that regard compared to all the other classes in this game. So yeah, is Pallegina one of the best paladins you can get in your party? Absolutely. But she's not the best offensive paladin you can get in your party. She's more like the best kind of support paladin, kind of. And like offensive support paladin because of the attack speeds. If you want just like a pure damage paladin, you probably want to go Bleak Walkers, right? If you want a more healing support paladin, you probably want to go Kind Wayfarer. So there are definitely reasons to hire a mercenary paladin that isn't Pallegina. But that said, Pallegina is one of the best paladins you can get, even including mercenaries. So I think I'm going to put her in S tier as well. Yeah, so we just did 3 S tiers in a row. Yeah, these are companions. I seldom make mercenaries of these ones. But let's move on now to Grieving Mother. Okay, Grieving Mother is a human cipher. Humans doing nothing here. Again, ciphers don't want to be taking damage, right? They want to be in the back line with a ranged weapon, avoiding aggro like a ranger, so humans not doing much. Stat-wise, she has a might of 11, constitution of 12, dexterity of 16, perception of 12, intellect of 17, resolve of 8. Now, the most important stats for ciphers are, you guessed it, intellect. Just like all of the casters, you want intellect as high as possible. Grieving Mother has a very high intellect, so yeah, we're starting off great. The second most important stat, in my opinion, for a cipher is perception, because ciphers need to be doing a mix of damage and also spell casting. They're kind of restricted in that way, where you have to build for both, and perception is kind of the best stat for building for both. Dexterity is a close second when it comes to building for both, and she has a very high dexterity. Her perception isn't low, but it's not high either. Might at 11 doesn't super matter, although it would be nice to boost the weapon attacks. Constitution at 12 is, I mean, frankly bad. I would prefer this to be dumped, just like her resolve is kind of dumped, so that you can improve her damage stats. That said, this is a pretty good stat spread for a Cypher, and she has no other unique features. I'm going to put Grieving Mother into B tier, probably around here. She's pretty good as a Cypher, but Cyphers have this like scaling problem where even little incremental bonuses can just snowball out of control, because they just, once they get rolling, every little bit of extra damage makes you get to your spells faster, which makes you deal more damage, which makes you able to cast more spells, and so on and so on and so on and so on. They really scale out of control. Grieving Mother is a good Cypher. I've done runs where I have Grieving Mother and she does all the things that a Cypher is supposed to do pretty well, but I think Cypher is a great choice for your main character or for a mercenary, so I'm going to put Grieving Mother there. Next up, Devil of Caroc. Let's look at her. Devil of Caroc is very interesting. She is actually a vessel, which is the class for undead, but she's not really undead. She is a construct, and that works whenever you dive into the lore of the game. It makes sense why constructs would also be counted as undead. Now, when I say she's a construct, she is actually a living soul. She was the living soul of a human that was put inside a machine. That's basically what happened. So she gets a lot of very unique features just from being a vessel, right? Getting this living machine bonus. Her class is a rogue. Her attributes are might of 14, constitution 11, dexterity 10, perception 16, intellect 12, resolve 14. Not good, not bad stats for a rogue. So when you're talking about rogues, your most important stats are all of your offensive stats. Perception, dexterity, might. You want to max these so you can deal as much damage as possible and just nuke targets. And her perception, dexterity, might are, like perception, might's good, dexterity low kind of sucks. Also, it really feels like she attacks very slowly to me. When I play Devil of Caroc, she attacks very slow. And part of this is because she has just a 10 dexterity, but also because she cannot wear armor since she technically is armor. And how they do that is they give her a special armor set that she cannot unequip. And that armor set is a heavy armor, which greatly restricts her action speed, and she does not have the dexterity to offset it at all. And so you get a rogue that's just attacking very slowly, and that honestly kind of sucks. You can kind of go tanky rogue with her, though, because Living Machine, I'll display it over on the side here, gives you a lot of immunities, which make you tanky. Her Constitution, I mean, it's not great, it's not bad. Her Resolve is pretty decent, and you can kind of do like a riposte build on her if you want, and that kind of works, but it's also just a bad way to build a rogue. You also get her very late in the game. It's a tough call on the Devil of Caroc. Like, I can see putting her up here because of all of the cool immunities that she gets. I could also see putting her down here because she's just not optimized to do what rogues need to do, which is one very hyper-specific thing. And then you get her late in the game, so you might as well hire a mercenary anyways. I think at the end of the day, I am just going to leave her in C tier. It's going to be C tier for the Devil of Caroc. And we move on to Maneha next. By the way, Devil of Caroc, Maneha, and Zahua are all companions that you get from the West Marches expansions. Here we go. Maneha is a coastal Amawa barbarian. Her stats are an 18 might, a 15 constitution, a dexterity of 9, a perception of 12, an intellect of 13, and a resolve of 11. This is honestly pretty decent for a particular kind of barbarian build, which is riposte barbarian. Barbarians don't need dexterity, and her dexterity is kind of low. They don't need it because they have a lot of ways to reset their attack animations, so it doesn't matter that her dexterity is 9. What they really want is a high might for healing, a high con for tanking, especially if you're going riposte build. A high perception really matters. Intellect matters, but you don't need it that high. I see people who just throw tons of intellect on their barbarians, and that is cool and fun, but you don't actually need it to be that high. Like a 13 intellect with some intellect boosting items is enough for you to hit 60% of the targets on the field with your carnage. Actually, I'm just going to say, I think Maneha's stats are pretty good. You get her kind of late in the game, which honestly is why I seldom use her. I usually hire barbarians. A lot of the value from barbarians comes from their early game. You're getting Maneha late game, but it feels like she should be an A because she's honestly a pretty good instance of barbarian. And if you want to rush to the White March, you could definitely do that. So I'm going to put Maneha in A tier. Moving on to Zahua next, and I believe this is our last companion. Here we go. Zahua is a human monk. Okay, monks actually can get some value out of the human racial feature. Still not the best, in my opinion. Attribute-wise, he has a 17 might and a 17 constitution, 13 dexterity, 10 perception, 10 intellect, 11 resolve. These are amazing stats for a monk. I mean, you can definitely min-max this a little bit higher to get a better monk, but these are pretty close to optimal in my opinion. Getting that on a companion, especially a monk companion, monks are crazy, crazy good. I think Zahua is an awesome unit and an awesome monk. I am definitely putting him at the high end of A tier for me. There's also just this factor where monks are so much better than the other tanky classes in the game, and they're the only real frontline class that can also carry. Like usually your front line is like Pallegina and Kana, right? And they're both units that you want to build tanky because they get a lot of value from uninteractive features like auras and team buffs and stuff like that. But if you actually want a frontline unit that kills the dragon, monk is your go-to here, right? I mean, barbarian is decent, but monks are better. Here is our companion tier list for Pillars of Eternity. I think we got a really cool spread here. Those are my opinions. You can let me know your opinions in the comments. Remember though, what we're ranking for is how likely are you to take this companion over a mercenary? If we were doing just sheer power of the units, right, like Durance would be in S tier, Sagani would be like down here, Pallegina would be down here, right? It would look something like this. Yeah, that's something else completely different. So now that we've done all that, I want to take a second to briefly talk about the narrative design for all of these companions because I love all of them. I just think the floor of these companions is incredible. Even the worst written ones, in my opinion, are still pretty good. Also, the ceiling is crazy because they have some GOAT contenders. Let's talk about GOAT contenders now. Durance. Yeah, Durance might be the best companion in CRPG history. I think he definitely needs to be considered for that. His writing is absolutely incredible. He fits with the themes of the games incredibly well. He's a very unique concept. He's kind of a disgusting person. He's revolting in a way that feels real. It doesn't feel comic-y or exaggerated. He's just kind of, yeah, I don't know how else to say it, except there's a vitality to Durance that you don't get to see in a lot of other characters. And let's face it, you know, I'm a writer. I like to write, and usually what writers make, especially for companions, is very likable units. It's rare that people are able to make a companion that is quite as revolting and repulsive, but still in a weirdly charming way for Durance. Durance is kind of like a Rasputin, you know, the real life Rasputin. I'm sure that the writer of Durance drew a lot from Rasputin when making him, and he absolutely nailed it. Durance also just says extremely profound things. There are lines that Durance says that stick with me. In my opinion, for Pillars 1, what you really want from a good companion in Pillars is a very emotional moment at the end, a memorable emotional moment, because all of these characters are exploring themes of loss and disappointment and finding meaning in an unforgiving and dark world. That is what the game is exploring. Durance has an incredible moment at the end. I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but definitely do a run with Durance on your team. He's amazing. You cannot miss him. Oh, by the way, Durance was written by the legendary game writer Chris Avellone. This was, I think, the last game he did for Obsidian, and his connection to the game I always found a little bit weird. A lot of people consider him the lead narrative designer, but that's not true. The lead narrative designer for this game was Eric Fenstermacher, who is himself a legendary narrative designer who worked on games like Neverwinter Nights 2, Fallout New Vegas, and of course the Pillars games. But yeah, it seems to me like when you really get into the archaeology and you dive through the old forum postings that were made while this game was in development, Avalon was very hyped because a lot of the appeal of this game was that it was referencing back to the Infinity Engine era, and Avalon famously worked on the game Planescape Torment, right? Which is many people consider one of the best written games of all time. Avalon was the narrative designer on that game. So yes, like he was a big part of the draw, the fact that he was on the team that made this game. But in the early stages, it doesn't seem to me like he was particularly involved. I could be totally wrong about this. I'm not a journalist, but I know that they had a priest companion and a cipher companion already made, and they're in the concept art. You can still see them, but then they were scrapped because Avalon came in kind of late in the development of the game and wrote Durance and Grieving Mother. Yeah, which I don't know, maybe that's normal, but it doesn't seem very normal to me. Anyways, I won't speculate about it. Whatever the conditions of him writing it, Durance is an S-tier companion when it comes to narrative design. Moving on to Aloth now. I'm going to put Aloth in B tier. I find him to be kind of weak when it comes to companions in terms of narrative design, but mostly because he's trying to fill a role that the other companions don't. Right, so Aloth is the first companion you get, and a lot of his personality or his narrative is just introducing some themes of the game to you. Themes about the wheel and the cycle of reincarnation and awakening and stuff like that. It is a very unique concept, right? Just a little spoiler for you guys, but you learn this pretty much right away with Aloth. He has two personalities. A former life of his awoke in him, and so sometimes he is speaking as Aloth, and sometimes he's speaking as Isilmir, the old English commoner that's awoken in him. And there's a lot of tension between him, who's kind of a gentry class, proper elf, and this old English commoner. They're very different personalities and they clash a lot, and that's cool. But he ends up not really having that incredible emotional moment. I find it a little bit weird that the wizard of the party is opposed to animancy. I've never really liked that. I get why they did it that way. It just feels like narratively dissonant. When I think of wizards, I think wizards are about unearthing forbidden knowledge, right? They're supposed to have that dark edge to them. And Aloth just kind of doesn't to me. Again, no big emotional moment at the end, so that's what's keeping Aloth in B tier for me. But again, definitely in another game, Aloth would be an incredibly unique companion. So next up, Eder. Eder is also going into S tier. Oh, by the way, Aloth was written by Carrie Patel. Eder is written by Eric Fenstermacher, who was the narrative designer of this game. He absolutely crushed this companion. Eder, better than any of the companions of this game, I think fits in with the overall themes of the game, which are about questioning of faith. Do you put your faith in humanity or in religion? Facing challenging questions and the death of God. Eder is tied up in that. He's just inseparable to the overall franchise and themes of the game. It makes sense to me that the narrative designer worked on him because all of the narrative themes of this and the game as a whole and the setting as a whole just click. He is extremely well voiced by Matt Mercer. I think Matt Mercer's work on Eder incredible. On Aloth, I could take it or leave it, but on Eder, he was amazing. Oh man, what else can I say about Eder? Oh yeah, he nails this archetype which a lot of games go for, which is the kind of golden retriever energy loyal friend, usually a mundane kind of warrior that just sticks with your party, is always a little bit upbeat, not too serious, is down to kind of help you with anything. A lot of games have them, Minsk from the original Baldur's Gate series kind of fits this archetype. Companions like Lan from Wrath of the Righteous goes for this archetype. Probably Karlach from Baldur's Gate 3 goes for this archetype. And while I like a lot of those companions, I don't think any of them execute it as well as Eder. He's also the avenue for some of the funniest jokes in Pillars of Eternity 1, which is kind of a weak part of the game, but Eder is hilarious. He's just brilliant. Another GOAT contender for me. Next up, in terms of narrative design, is Kana. I'm putting Kana into C tier. I hate to do it because I like the concept of Kana. He's searching for ancient knowledge delving into archaeological ruins to find it. I love that kind of scholar Indiana Jones archetype. But there wasn't much to it for Kana, to me, that really made it cool. And he has this like jolly, upbeat sort of personality, which I guess makes the disappointment of his main quest, which is in all of these companions. I guess it just makes it sting a little more, and it I don't know, it doesn't seem to work for me as much. So I don't know what to say. A lot of this is vibes, but that's how I vibe with Kana. Next up is Sagani. Sagani is going into S tier. Sagani is also written by Carrie Patel. She did Sagani and Aloth. I think Sagani is by far the better companion that she wrote. By the way, Carrie Patel is now the lead designer of Avowed. And one of the reasons I'm hyped about Avowed is because I saw where she started in this industry. It was writing Sagani, and she crushed it. She was a talent right from the very beginning. And so I am willing to see what she is going to deliver now because of the work she's done in the past. So what makes Sagani so good? I find her to be a very likable character, kind of similar to Eder. She has that like loyal golden retriever energy, which I like. It's very easier to keep her in the party. Again, a lot of funny jokes are there. But she explores very Dwarven themes of family and tradition, but in a very non-Dwarven way, which I think is very innovative and cool. And then there's this moment at the end of her quest line. There's a line where she's kneeling on the ground and she says, "This is all useless anyways." And then she just begins to list the people in her village. You won't know the context unless you play through her quest, but I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it. I still get goosebumps when I play through Sagani's quest. It's so beautiful and haunting, but in an understated way. She was doing what a lot of people now praise Baldur's Gate 3 for in quests like Astarion's quest or Karlach's quest. It was done in Sagani's quest, but in my opinion, in a more haunting and more understated kind of way, which I vibe with way more. Another GOAT companion. These are the three here. This is the holy trinity of companions, which make this game incredible in my opinion. Moving on now to Hiravias. I'm going to put Hiravias into B tier as well. No, I'm going to bump him up to A tier now that I'm thinking about it. Hiravias is pretty good. Narrative-wise, his themes do not tie into the themes of the overall world as well. Again, they have the kind of Aloth problem where he's mostly a lore dump. Going through his quest is just teaching you about reincarnation and the world. That said, his actual personality and the way he's voiced is really, really well done to me. By the way, Hiravias is written by Matt McLean, who I'm not very familiar with, but I think he did make a pretty good character here. Next up is Pallegina. I'm going to put Pallegina into B tier. Pallegina was written by Josh Sawyer, who was the lead designer of this game and an absolute legend in this industry, so this is no slight to Josh, and as I said before, Pallegina is honestly one of my favorite Paladin companions. That said, what makes Pallegina really cool is what I consider lore, not drama. And I kind of prefer the companions to have a little more drama than lore in their narrative. By lore, I mean a lot of world building stuff. Pallegina establishes a lot of cool things, like the idea of an avian godlike, the different relationships that people can have towards being a godlike. She establishes a lot of lore about the Valian republics and their ideas about religion and trade and gender, and all of that stuff is very cool. It's great work that he did, but it doesn't end up being very dramatic in her actual quest. And so that's my reason putting her into B tier. Next up is Grieving Mother. I am going to put Grieving Mother also into B tier, I think. And a lot of people are going to be really pissed off about this because Grieving Mother and Durance, I think, are usually considered the best written companions of this game, both of them written by Avalon, and I'm 100% agree with Durance. I don't agree as much with Grieving Mother. I actually find reading through Grieving Mother's backstory to be kind of a slog. And there is something beautiful about it, but I just don't vibe with it nearly as much as I vibe with Durance. And then there's this kind of like anime quality to her character, right? Where no one can see her except for you. I mean, it's neat. It's not bad. But yeah, again, I guess I just don't vibe with it as much, especially in this particular kind of game. This isn't the kind of game. It's not like Baldur's Gate 3, where every companion is a unique and special and overpowered kind of unit. They're much more mundane characters, and Grieving Mother just didn't seem to fit as much with that. Next up, Devil of Caroc. I'm going to put Devil of Caroc into A tier. I really like Devil of Caroc's writing, to be honest. I don't know who wrote her. I can't remember now, but I think they did a great job. Yeah, Devil Caroc is just kind of dealing with past trauma, and she deals with themes of revenge in a way that I find very cool and compelling, and I think that's all I'm going to say about that. Maneha, for me, I don't know. I'm just going to put her into C tier, which feels bad because a lot of work went into this character. She gets more attention than a lot of characters do because she was kind of explored in a DLC, and her connection to the events of that DLC are important. And she establishes a lot of lore, but I don't know what to say except that I find it very difficult to read through her questline. I just don't vibe with her as much. That said, Zahua, I do vibe with. I think Zahua's story is really interesting and cool. So yeah, here is my narrative companion tier list. So you got a 2-for-1 deal on this companion tier list video, but now I have been talking for a while. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.